reduce the stakes involved. Well over 100 heads of state, heads of government and senior royals will all need to travel through London to an 800-year-old church with no permanent security perimeter. Once again, the new king and his heir will walk behind the coffin through the streets of Westminster, which will be largely closed to traffic. An unknown number of people will gather along the ceremonial route and in Hyde Park, where the funeral can be watched on large screens.
The service will also be televised worldwide, including in New Zealand. This central Auckland resident says it will be the ceremony of a lifetime.
I'll watch it until I can't stay awake anymore. She's been an extraordinary woman, and it is a ritual and ceremony that we won't see again in my lifetime.
After the funeral, the Queen's coffin will then begin its final journey to Windsor Castle. The number of people in hospital with COVID-19 has dropped to the lowest level since February. 175 people with the virus are receiving hospital care, including 2 in intensive care. Daily case numbers are also continuing to gradually drop, with the rolling average now at 1,369. A principal in Cambridge is praising students for calmly making their way back to class when a lockdown bell rang. At least 3 schools in the Waikato town spent an hour in lockdown until the police found a youth with a BB gun. Cambridge Middle School principal Daryl Gibbs says he spoke to the students afterwards.
We asked the teachers to bring them straight to the hall, and we just had a very quick debrief where we, thank them all for being, following the instructions and doing what they were meant to do, and doing such a good job and being really responsible and mature about it all, and taking it seriously.
Daryl Gibbs says it's the second lockdown in recent months after the school received phone threats in July. Police fired more than 100 rounds of sponge bullets on the final day of the parliamentary protest in Wellington on March the 2nd. According to information released on the police website, 9 officers shot 109 rounds as the protest turned into a violent riot. Released emails show police tried to source pepper spray at short notice after the protest began in February. More than 250 people were arrested during the protest. To sport, the All Whites captain Winston Reid will retire from international football after Sunday's match against Australia in Auckland. The 34-year-old former West Ham defender has played 32 times for the national team, nearly half as captain. He also had spells with US Major League side Sporting Kansas City in 2020 and Brentford as part of their Premier League promotion-winning run. Half the Jamaican netball team has finally arrived in New Zealand for the Test series against the Silver Ferns 3 days late. 7 of the 12 players touched down in Auckland this morning, but there's no guarantee the other 5 will arrive in time for Wednesday's first test. Visa problems meant the Test series had to be reduced from 3 to 2 tests. The White Ferns captain, Sophie Devine, says they have to trust the work they have done in recent months, going into tonight's first one-day cricket international against the West Indies in Antigua. A tropical storm has delayed the start of the series, and the tourists have spent the past 3 days stuck inside. However, with the Commonwealth Games and the 100 tournament in Britain, Sophie Devine is confident they've played enough cricket recently.
We were supposed to play a couple of days ago now, and not much has changed for us. It's just given us, I guess, a couple more days to freshen up and a little bit different preparation, but certainly I think this group is really ready to go.
The game starts at 1:30 in the morning. That's the news.
The final farewell.
I have no expectation of what it might be like, but I imagine a good chunk of my time will be spent just thinking about the privilege it is to be there in the first place.
Her family reflects.
She has been part of our lives forever. I can't remember anybody except the Queen being there.
And the fans camp out ahead of the funeral.
There's hundreds of people camped out on chairs and tents. This area was full hustle and bustle. There was trucks removing lampposts, there was helicopters circling.
For all the news you need, Morning Reports, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
We're on air on rnz.co.nz and on your mobile. Lisa Owen and Checkpoint next, but first the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Bay of Plenty, periods of rain with heavy falls. Auckland to Taranaki, including Coromandel and the Central High Country. Rain with heavy falls possible, easing to isolated showers tomorrow morning. Rain developing from the north from late tomorrow afternoon. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Whanganui to Wellington. Scattered rain clearing tomorrow morning. morning, but returning to Gisborne tomorrow evening. Marlborough and Nelson, scattered showers clearing this afternoon, then mainly fine. A few showers in Nelson and the Sounds tomorrow afternoon. Buller, Westland and Fiordland showers turning to rain tomorrow morning. Heavy falls, hail and thunderstorms possible in Fiordland and Westland, gradually easing from the south tomorrow morning. In Canterbury, mainly fine, isolated showers developing tomorrow afternoon. For Otago and Southland, scattered showers, thunderstorms possible in Southland, Clutha and Dunedin tomorrow afternoon. And for the Chatham Islands, mainly fine, rain developing around midday tomorrow. This is RNZ National. It's just gone 7 minutes past 5. I'll have the headlines at around 20 past.
Nā mihi Sarah, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. In a few hours' time, London will play host to the Queen's final farewell, an event on a monumental scale. London is packed. An estimated 2 million people will be on the streets to see the procession pass by. Billions more are expected to tune in, making it the most watched televised event in history. The queue is officially over, with the last people due to pass the Queen's coffin in the next half hour. Now people are camped out on the streets, hoping for a glimpse of the procession as it passes by. Our reporter Katie Todd and cameraman Nick Monroe spent time with those who'd endured nights out in the cold.
Free crossing. Free crossing today, no charges.
Sore bodies, new friendships, packed meals, cold fingers. Such has been the reality of getting close to the Queen's coffin in Westminster Hall to say a personal goodbye. These people queued for a whole night, along the equivalent length of Auckland CBD to Takapuna on the North Shore. For a moment in time, they say they'll treasure forever.
It's just surreal. I can't explain the feeling. It's just beautiful. Well worth the wait.
It was emotional. We was waiting for in the queue, 15 hour. The last night we joined the queue, but it's still worth it, it's just to pay the respect to the Queen. She's a lovely lady, and this is all about the respect.
Hundreds of thousands of people have made the pilgrimage along the Thames since Wednesday evening, and that's just what it is for them. A show of sacrifice and effort for the woman they say dedicated her whole life to them.
It's a worthwhile thing to pay respect to the boss.
Soldier Phil Tucker, unperturbed by the cold temperatures and long wait, he came prepared for 2 nights.
We've got a stall, a rescued chair, which is going to be better because after we've done this, we're going to find a place for the funeral tomorrow.
Oh wow, so you're going to camp out 2 nights?
Yeah, I've got a sleeping bag and a blow-up mattress, yeah.
And if you think that's impressive, you only need to take a trip down to the corner of Parliament Square to see something even more impressive. These people have been camping out here for 2 nights already, and they've still got a third to go before the Queen's funeral, all to catch a glimpse of the procession afterwards. Steve is among those in the new tent village across from Westminster Abbey.
Tent, air mattress, minus 18 degree sleeping bag because it got quite low last night. A TV stick from a tablet so I can watch all of you guys broadcasting. Solar panel, charge, battery charge, everything with everything you need for luxury. We're doing better than a lot of these people in these hotels, I can tell you that.
And on the very front row, in perhaps the most prime position, is a tent commandeered by Zoe Maidment, who arrived on Friday. She's a scout leader from Essex who decided she'd rather camp out for the procession than see the Queen lying in state. So far, she's glad she did.
You kind of get to know each other, and it's, can you watch my stuff whilst I run to the toilet? Yeah, no problem. And everybody loves to be able to share a story about how they've been to previous events, how they've seen the Queen, things like that. So it really is kind of a bit of a campfire, really. Everybody sharing stories.
And something to remember for your life.
It is definitely going to be something that I'll remember. It's just a shared experience.
The Queen's funeral will take place at 11 o'clock on Monday morning, London time. News reports in the UK estimate as many as 2 million people will gather in central London, and there could be 4.1 billion viewers globally.
And that piece from Katie Todd and Nick Monroe, the video version will be on our website. Wow, there's some Very determined people there. And Corin Dan is in London and he joins us now live. Kia ora, Corin. What's happening where you are?
Good morning, Lisa. Kia ora, everybody. Yes, well, I'm right where the queue was last night. Now, you'll be aware that that has closed some hours ago now. And it would have just actually snaked over towards that direction, just towards Westminster Abbey. So that's now, that will, there might be a few people still making their way into the Abbey, but the lying in state will finish at 6:30. Where I am right now is just Westminster Bridge. Right behind me was where those tents are lined up to see that procession as it goes into Westminster Abbey. It's pretty quiet and eerie here at the moment by London standards. There's still plenty of people around, and by this week's standards. But you get a sense that there's a little bit of calm starting to descend on things as we build up to what I think, given the amount of energy and effort that has gone in this week, is going to be a pretty emotional experience.
Corin, the people who were queued to view the Queen's coffin, did they have a cut-off time? So it's not like anyone gets to the back of line and, whoops, sorry, there's not enough time for you to go by.
Yeah, those people have to get in, as we heard there, quite some time earlier. They're sort of like holding pens which will be shut off. They just will say there's too many people. So whenever that is, I expect they're already full now. Just getting from here across the bridge back up over to the Mall and up towards Hyde Park, as you well know, where there's going to be a couple of million people in this area. And the logistics of getting there and moving around and trying to do anything are going to be very, very difficult. Hyde Park, there'll be hundreds of thousands, I would expect, watching on big screens. Probably the best way to watch the funeral. Cinemas around the country are opening up so people can watch it. This country is going to absolutely stop to a standstill this morning to watch this. And I think there's just been such a build-up to this. It's going to be such a focal point for quite a lot of emotion.
And Corin, you've been there for a few days now. Are you kind of getting a handle on the scale of this?
I think so. It is difficult to try and grasp at times. I mean, it's when you see just a few minutes ago, you know, a horde of police, 100 police just marching by casually. That's no big deal now. They're just everywhere. Katie Todd was talking about last night about them whipping out traffic posts so that people wouldn't climb up them, like literally taking them out of the ground. I saw people taking bollards out of the ground because they're worried about the crowds and the potential, I guess, for people to be pushed up against them. That's the scale they've gone to. And what you also get is the sense that they have planned this for years. For some say decades, this plan has been in place, always there, ready to go, updated constantly, minute by minute, down to the absolute nth degree. They know exactly how this is going to play. And with the world watching, you can imagine this is going to be quite spectacular in the way everything is regimented. The walking pace of the procession has been practiced. The horses have been trained so they don't get put off by people sobbing. You know, nothing has been left undone here.
Tell me a little bit about, well, the resilience and determination of the people there who are obviously set up camp. And it's such a contrast, isn't it? They're in the most basic of conditions, waiting to see what potentially will be the grandest thing they witness or experience in their lifetimes.
Yeah, I guess it is. I mean, it's just so regal and so over the top. The people here, without fail, whoever you talk to in the queue or people come up and talk to us, they are happy to do it. They want to do it. They feel as though it is part of their journey. They don't see it as any sacrifice. They see that as their tribute. And that has been an overwhelming sentiment here in the UK. All the media has been, you think we've been obsessed with the queue, you should see the focus on UK media around that queue and the people. And it is the people that have made this, and I think the Royals have been buoyed by that. I mean, they will be, to see the response, to see that there is still so much love for certainly the Queen and the Royals, perhaps to a lesser extent, but certainly the Queen. And that has lifted them and lifted this country and given it a focal point to come together. And there is a real sense of people being in a shared experience, which you don't get so much in such an atomised world that we live in. That is what has really been the striking feature of this week.
Good to talk to you, Corin. Thanks for joining us. Corin Dan there live in London, and the funeral gets underway at 10 p.m. New Zealand time. It's almost 17 after 5. Kia mau tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Are you going to stay up for the funeral tonight? Would you watch the whole thing, or just stay up and, until your bedtime? Or going to catch up on the highlights in the morning? Or will it pass you by completely? I'm really curious to know. Do text us on 2101. You can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And still to come, Air New Zealand is wheels down on its first direct flight from New York, but not everyone could bring their bags with them. We'll explain why. National MP Sam Uffindell has been brought back into the fold after an independent report didn't find evidence of more widespread bullying. The MP for Tauranga admitted he was a bully at school and was asked to leave, but Maria Dew Casey found allegations made by a former university flatmate who claimed he acted in a threatening way to her nearly 20 years ago were unproven. Christopher Luxon says because of that, Sam Uffindell has been reinstated to caucus.
I also believe in forgiveness and second chances. And if someone can demonstrate a genuine understanding of their behaviour and the way that it has negatively impacted others, and can then show that they have become a better person, they deserve a second chance. And I am pleased to welcome Sam back into the National Party caucus, and I'm pleased that we can now move forward.
Sam Uffindell says it's been a tough 6 weeks, but he was looking forward to getting back to work.
The serious allegations relating to the University of Otago were thoroughly investigated by Maria Dew, and she has cleared me on those.
So is your flatmate telling the truth?
Look, I'm not going to comment on that. You know, it was two sides to each story, as you'd understand, that it was thoroughly investigated.
Well, our political editor Jane Patterson joins us now. Jane, what did this report actually say?
Well, we don't know what it said specifically, Lisa, because the report, even its terms of reference, weren't made public. Christopher Luxon, the party president, Sylvia Wood and Sam Uffindell fronted at a media conference today and basically provided a summary of the findings of the report, but we haven't seen any specifics of it or the report itself. Basically, Maria Dew Casey was looking into the specific allegation around the Otago University flat, and basically she came back and said that she did not see or did not find evidence that he had acted in that way. So he was accused of acting in a very threatening and abusive way towards this former flatmate, and it meant, she said, that it forced her to flee out of the flat at the time. But Maria Dew said that she did not find evidence that that had happened effectively, and nor could she find any other evidence and other circumstances of bullying. The terms of reference, the report had been open to other people who wanted to, come forward potentially, but no one did. So few specifics. We do know that 14 people were interviewed and there were several written statements. So, we asked Mr. Luxon, how can you be so definitive saying that he did not act like that in terms of the report's finding? And he said that it was given over to an independent Casey, and she did an impartial and thorough job. It does sound like another flatmate who was there at the time of the incident may have been interviewed, and it sounds like obviously quite a lot of weight has been given to their version of events, but this is where we're left. Still a he said, she said situation. Sam Uffindell flatly denying it, backed by the report, but the complainant, backed by her father at the time, was very strong in her version of what happened.
And in saying that there was no additional finding of bullying, Sam Uffindell conceding that this flatmate, the female flatmate, may have heard things that she shouldn't have during conversations held in the flat, and apologised for his part in the disintegration of, if you like, the flat environment, didn't he?
That's right. So on one hand, he didn't want to talk about any of the specifics of the report. He didn't want to engage with the complainant. He said that out of respect he had not tried to engage with her, but basically he then painted it as a situation where, a flat had broken down and relationships had obviously deteriorated. He did let slip during the media conference that she had overheard things that he said were probably upsetting, and he apologised for that. So, as I said, a real mix of still he said, she said. In the end, he said that, he'll come back to Parliament. It's now up to prove himself in terms of the National Party. They've really given him, I suppose, the benefit of the doubt, backed by that report. So now it's up to him to come back and, I suppose, prove those claims from him that he is a very different person, that he has learnt from it, and that he is standing up as a former bully, decrying it and acknowledging the harm, I suppose, caused to other people.
Let's talk about the timing of this, Jane. Released on the eve of the Queen's funeral.
That's right. Cynical from Grant Robertson, Deputy Prime Minister, the timing of it, given that there's going to be mass blanket coverage of the Queen's funeral. That was put to Christopher Luxon. He said that this report had already been delayed. As you and I have talked about, it was initially set down for 2 to 3 weeks. It stretched out to 6 weeks. He said that it was received last Thursday night. He had a look at it over the weekend, and they, decided the course of action. He said he acknowledged that obviously it was on a very busy news day, the eve of the Queen's funeral, but also that he would have copped criticism if they'd held on to that report for much longer, given that there had already been a delay. So I suppose he got it out as quickly as he could, but maybe will benefit from the blanket coverage of the Queen's funeral, that it won't be given maybe quite so much coverage as it otherwise would have been.
Kia ora rā, Eho. Thank you for joining us. That is Jane Patterson, our political editor, live from Wellington. 23 minutes after 5, and you're with Checkpoints on RNZ National. And Homai o Whakaaro, really keen for your feedback on that one. Sam Uffindell's back inside the National Party caucus, reinstated to his position, Tauranga MP there. The report found no further proof of bullying outside of the incidents that he had admitted to at school when he was a teenager. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at checkpointrnz, or the email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's go to the headlines now. Sarah is standing by. Ane Sarah, mina pita kōrero.
Kia ora, Lisa. A report has concluded that National MP Sam Uffindell did not behave aggressively towards a female flatmate at university in the early 2000s, and that there were differing accounts of what happened. The Tauranga MP was suspended from National's caucus in August after RNZ reported the allegations. He has now been reinstated. The National Party leader, Christopher Luxon, says he's pleased the caucus can now move forward. 2,000 people will attend the Queen's state funeral at Westminster Abbey in London tonight, and hundreds of thousands of others are expected to line the streets of the capital. After the service, the Queen's coffin will be taken to Wellington Arch at Hyde Park Corner. The hearse will then travel to Windsor Castle for a final family ceremony at the chapel. The Employment Court in Christchurch has heard that taxpayer-funded benefits for the Gloria Vale community's children provided up to $4.5 million. A former leader, Zion Pilgrim, says the children were also expected to work from the age of 6 in what he describes as punishing conditions. The court is considering whether the workers were employees or volunteers. And the number of people in hospital with COVID-19 continues to fall, with 175 hospitalisations recorded today, the lowest number since February. In the past week, there were 9,606 new cases of the virus and 74 deaths. I'll have updated news headlines at around 5:40.
Thank you, Sarah. A lot of you getting in touch about the Queen's funeral and the broadcasts taking place this evening, about whether you're going to watch it or not. This person says, up all night for our house, ! Tony, though, not so much. Tony says, pass me by completely, be catching up on Netflix. David says, being a staunch royalist, I will be watching it until the end. This is part of our heritage and history. Do keep your feedback coming. 2101 is the text, or tweet us at checkpointrnz. Talking about our heritage and history, the All Blacks are back in Aotearoa after last week's dramatic Bledisloe Cup test in Melbourne. Ahead of Saturday's second match against the Wallabies at Eden Park, the good, bad and ugly was discussed at today's media session in Auckland. Our sports reporter Clay Wilson was there and joins me now. OK, Clay, there's been some interesting comments about that nasty injury suffered by All Blacks midfielder Quinn Tupaia in the match. What's being said?
Yeah, so for those that didn't see it, this happened at a ruck Wallabies lock Darcy Swain dove in at Quintupai when he was braced over the back of the ruck into the side of his knee. It was pretty ugly to watch. For those that are squeamish, maybe don't go and check the video. But what's happened is that Quintupai has ruptured a ligament in his knee. He's going to be out for at least 3 months, potentially more at this stage. Now, during the game, Darcy Swain was yellow carded, but the citing commissioner for Sanzar has come out and said that it should have been a red card, and Darcy Swain's going to face the judiciary later tonight. It's obviously something in sport you never like to see. I mean, it's not nice to watch anyway, but to see an athlete who trains hard, that's his job, to have to suffer something like that, but especially for his teammates. And we spoke to a couple of his teammates today, and here's what Beauden Barrett had to say when he asked if the All Blacks had a view on the incident and how it played out.
Yeah, we do. He basically didn't see it coming. He was a sitting duck, and it was a bit of a free shot, so I feel for him because he's going to be out of the game for a long period of time, and I'm not too sure what's happening in their camp with Darcy Swain, so we don't like to see these sorts of injuries.
And we also heard from halfback Aaron Smith on it, and he had some short but sweet thoughts on what happened.
Not sure.
We didn't. We don't have that. Right, okay. Well,
what did he say?
He basically said the injuries happen, but some of them can be controlled. So I think it's fairly clear. It wasn't they were very
unhappy that it's happened and how it happened.
Yeah, reserved about how they got it across, but I think it's clear from hearing Beauden Barrett speak that that they weren't that enamoured with what Darcy Swain did. So we'll see what the judiciary decide tonight about that and the fate of Darcy Swain and whether he'll play this weekend or not. I find it doubtful, but let's see what plays out.
Okay, now fill me in on this next story because I'm confused. So the Jamaican netball team finally arrives, right? But they've only got 7 players. So where are the rest of them?
Yeah, well, I mean, we spoke about this last week. Obviously, their departure was delayed. They had those visa issues. So 7 have arrived this morning. The other 5 obviously are still having issues with their visas and haven't been able to arrive. So they've reduced it from 3 tests to 2, but there's no guarantee that those other 5 players are going to get here in time for that first game of 2 games, which is on Wednesday night here in Auckland. So we'll see what plays out. Netball fans will obviously have their fingers crossed, but it'll be a shame if it has to be cancelled completely for Silver Ferns and those netball fans. But
what happens if a player, is not fit to play or gets, we don't wish injury on anyone, but taken out? 7 players. You've got 7 players.
It's already a pretty weak squad that Jamaica is sending anyway. So, not looking great, but I guess we'll see over the next 24 to 36 hours what happens.
If the backups arrive.
Yeah, and just before I go, a quick note on the retirement of All Whites captain Winston Reid. He's retired from international football. I think he's going to carry on playing at club level, but a player who's done a lot in the All Whites jersey, famous at the 2010 World Cup and what the All Whites did there, a big part of that. So he's going to, after this, they're playing Australia obviously on Sunday in Auckland, so after that game he's going to retire from the All Whites jersey.
At 34, I think he is, Because we were all thinking, how old is he? We thought he was much older because he's been around for a while.
Exactly,
so,
it does feel like that, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Hey, thanks for that, Clay. That's Clay Wilson with Sport there. Air New Zealand's first direct flight from New York has touched down in Auckland, but not everyone on board has walked away with their luggage. The airline says because of adverse weather leaving the Big Apple, some bags stayed there too. Lucy Sear was at Auckland Airport for touchdown.
Air New Zealand's first direct flight from New York to Auckland landed this morning, and that was the sound of the warm welcome its cabin crew came home to. The 17-hour flight from the John F. Kennedy International Airport is the company's longest flight ever operated. While passengers say the in-flight experience was pleasant, some were frustrated that their luggage has not arrived.
Flight was brilliant. Flight was calm. Felt the flight. Food was good, but then we've lost our luggage. Our luggage didn't make it on the flight. Half of the flight, their luggage is still in New York.
Air New Zealand's Chief Operating Officer Alex Marin says due to additional fuel requirements triggered by adverse weather, some customers' bags couldn't be loaded in New York. She says they're working on getting the bags delivered to New Zealand as soon as possible. The company couldn't confirm the number of passengers affected. 19-year-old Lucia Tiva, who's come to study English in New Zealand, says she did not expect to be parted with her luggage on her first international trip.
We want our clothes, we want our baggage, I want to take a shower with my products, I want my stuffs.
Miss Tiva says there's been no certainty from Air New Zealand on when her bags will arrive. Also on board were some of the Jamaican netball team, who have had a rocky time getting here in the first place. They say they're relieved to have their luggage here, which includes all the gear they need for their tests against the silver ferns this week.
I think we were the lucky ones because as soon as we got off the plane and we went to the carousel, we just saw us just coming right behind each other. The line was long for the other passengers, so I think we're the lucky ones.
Popular aviation YouTuber Sam Choi says he's had a great flight experience as part of his South Pacific tour.
It's literally completely, took off from nighttime. It's completely overnight until we reach South Pacific just a few hours before you see the sunrise. So it's really good for sleeping because it's such a long overnight flight.
Meanwhile, eateries and cafes at the airport are excited about a potential increase in business the new flagship flight could bring.
It's so exciting. We're really looking forward to it because we obviously lacked that business at the airport as well. So it's quite nice having the foot traffic come through and, it's an exciting time when there's a lot of people around and there's a real buzz about it, so it's nice, yeah.
We're quite excited that the airport's getting busier and busier, which is great. It's finally opening up and the world's opening up, which is nice. Getting prepared for it has been a challenge with staffing and whatnot, but it's exciting times.
Traversing a distance of more than 14,000 kilometres, the flagship flight is the fourth longest operating flight in the world. The flagship route will be operating 3 times a week.
It is 28 minutes to 6. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National and you've tuned in just in time for the business news. Ko taku hoa e nai ko Nona Peltier. Nona Peltier joins me in the studio live. Let's start with the services sector. Activity is at its highest level in nearly a year and a half.
That's right.
Wow.
Well, I guess it's because we are getting tourists again. They enjoy their services, and the restrictions at the border have eased. So there's a lot more activity, people going out,
Remind us
spending
what
their money.
industries we're talking about.
Well, services are really anything that isn't a goods. So goods and services. So goods being manufactured items, services being anything else. And so we're talking about services, people serving you a drink or what have you in a bar. A restaurant.
Going parachuting, riding a boat down in Queenstown.
Anything where somebody's providing a service. It could be a trade, it could be anything. So at the highest level in a year and a half, and that's quite substantial. One of the things that's really interesting is that the gains have been in new activities and sales. Expansion over 50, is positive. Anything under is negative. So we're at 67.1 when it comes to sales and new activity. That's really high. However, when you're looking at things like employment, not so good. 50.8, that's just barely in expansion. Deliveries, again, reflecting the supply chain constraints, still in a contracted position. But overall, it does point to very strong economic growth in the third quarter, perhaps as high as 5% annual growth.
Okay. Now, this next story, New Zealand Rural Land Management, and there'll be people going, who? What? Says it's looking to increase foreign investment in the business. What's the reason? Who are they?
Yeah, New Zealand Rural Land Management is a company that was listed not so long ago on the NZX. And one of the chair is Rob Campbell. He's the chair of quite a few very, prominent organizations. He's basically saying that the company's done an excellent job. He said this as an annual report. However, he's not very satisfied with the, investor apathy inside New Zealand. He's saying that investors are basically sitting on their hand, complaining about the NZX, and doing very little about investing in very good quality companies like this one. So what are they going to do? They're going to open up, they're going to look for foreign investment. So at the moment, it's about 24% foreign investment. They're going to look for more, and they're going to look at perhaps listing on another market where we don't know. They didn't say. However, it's sort of basically saying, come on, people, invest in a good company like ours, rah, rah, rah. Whether you believe it or not, well, I guess you'll just have to go and read the annual report yourself.
Okay, now speaking of NZX, let's go for a twirl around the market.
Well, we fell 0.4%. That's not a surprise. That's a 48-point drop to 11,532. The New Zealand dollar is still been battered, along with almost every other currency in the world, against the US at 59.7. 89 Australian and 52.4 pence. It's not a surprise.
So US below the 60 cent mark again.
Yeah. And it's not a surprise because we're expecting to hear from many of the big banks this week. The U.S. Federal Reserve is the one that people are going to be watching very closely because they could be raising interest rates by 75 basis points or even 100, which is like a 1% hike. That would be huge. 1 percentage point hike.
Yes.
And then, of course, there's the Bank of England, there's the Bank of Japan, the Bank of China, Bank of Australia. Well, it's almost everybody's going to be talking to us this week.
Okay, enough to keep you busy. Thank you, Nona. Nona Peltier there with business news. And in breaking news, the Queen's lying in state has officially ended. The last mourners have passed through Westminster Hall. In the next few hours, the King will lead a procession behind the Queen's coffin as she is moved to Westminster Abbey for Her Majesty's funeral service, which begins at 10 p.m. New Zealand time. The Queen's favourite home will be her final resting place. After the funeral service in Westminster Abbey, the Queen's coffin will be taken to St George's Chapel at Westminster for a committal service. Our reporter Katie Todd joins us now from Windsor. Kia ora, Katie. What is expected to happen there?
Kia ora. Well, the main event here doesn't actually start for another 8 hours. If you're watching the show tonight, you might not pick that because there are hundreds of people lining the fences here along what's called the Long Walk up to Windsor Castle. They're trying to get a good viewing spot for there will be a procession here at 3 o'clock p.m. The coffin will make its way up the Long Walk, which is about 5 kilometres, up to Windsor Castle and to St George's Chapel, where the committal ceremony will take place. After that, there will be a private burial ceremony at 7:30 p.m. Now, most of these people say they've gotten up really early this morning and secured a spot. You can probably see there's lots of camping chairs here, umbrellas, flasks of coffee, and large screens on which people can watch the funeral taking place over in London before the procession heads here. It's a huge operation. There's 21 streets closed in Windsor. There's a big security checkpoint. There's generators, coffee carts. It's all go here this morning.
Thank you, Katie. That is Katie Todd, who was joining us from Windsor. Apologies for the quality of the audio on the line there. Let's get to some of your feedback now on the question of Sam Uffindell and his return to the National Party caucus. This person says, where's Luxon to answer your questions on Sam Yu, says Sue. Well, we did ask for an interview, Sam. Wasn't available. And also, a lot of you are watching the Queen and the Queen's funeral. A lot of you are not going to. Jeanette from Paeroa says, black dress and pearls ready, candles, flowers, the works here to honour Her Majesty with a love heart. Jeanette from Paeroa, thank you for getting in touch. Someone else says, I'll be watching right through if I can stay awake. History in the making. And another listener's got in touch to say, the funeral, I'm not a royalist, but I think it's a once-in-a-lifetime part of history, and I find it very interesting to see and read about it all, especially the funny stories about the Queen. Yeah, it's interesting to hear about Kiwis' interactions with her. Someone else says, considering Corin's comments about the preparations, I remember when I worked at the Department of Work and Pensions in the UK for 12 years, till 2004, I was reminded to have enough mourning paper for the letters we sent out, and that is the A4 letter with a black border around it. And that's Michael from Christchurch. So from 2004, you're making sure that you had the right stationery, Michael, to send should the Queen die during that time. It's really interesting to know what goes on behind the scenes. Another person says, please, no more royal reporting. I'm over it. Desperate staff interviewing people in the 14-hour queue. Yawn, the florist, the Paddington Bear manufacturer. Come on, let her go with some dignity instead of cashing in on it 24/7. So some of you not keen. And another person, well, they reckon that the royal family don't have much value, but they wish King Charles III a long life. And they say so that they won't have to be alive for another crowning of another monarch. Okay, let us know what you think. And someone else says, what happened at Otago University? Who is telling the truth? This is about Sam Uffindell. This is not satisfactory at all. Bob says, seems like he has qualities to be a future leader for National. I think Bob's being a bit tongue-in-cheek with that one. And should we do one more on that before we carry on? National Party are saying what is in the report is hearsay only. That is Catherine from Hamilton. We haven't seen the report ourselves. They're only giving us a summary of the situation. It is 20 to 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. He aho o whakaaro, what do you think of that? The National Party reinstating Sam Uffindell. He's back in the caucus after that report found no evidence of further bullying. Let us know your thoughts on that or anything else you've heard on the program this evening. Do get in touch. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's go to the headlines now. Ko Sarah anō tēnei.
Thank you, Lisa. The United Kingdom is expected to come to a standstill for the Queen's state funeral tonight. The ceremony gets underway at Westminster Abbey at 10 o'clock New Zealand time and will be broadcast on RNZ National. 2,000 people are attending and tens of thousands are likely to line London's streets. Meanwhile, a national minute of silence will be observed at the start of New Zealand's memorial service for the Queen, which takes place in Wellington next Monday. National MP Sam Uffindell says it's been a tough 6 weeks, but he's looking forward to getting back to work. An independent investigation has found that allegations he acted in a threatening way to a female student when he was at university 20 years ago cannot be substantiated. Mr Uffindell has been reinstated to caucus. The Employment Court in Christchurch has heard that Gloriavale received up to $4.5 million in social welfare benefits for the children of the Christian community. The hearing is considering whether former members who worked at the West Coast sect were employees or volunteers. And many passengers arriving in Auckland on Air New Zealand's first direct flight from New York found themselves without their luggage this morning. The airline says some bags couldn't be loaded onto the flight because bad weather meant the plane needed extra fuel. Those are the headlines. I'll have more news and weather at 6 o'clock.
Ngā mihi, Sarah. Uncontrolled dogs are savaging livestock in nighttime raids on farms in the far north, leaving helpless owners with dead animals and big vet bills. The dogs have killed and maimed sheep, lambs, cows and chickens at properties in Te Iringa near Kaikoi. John Coleman and his wife Lily's farm has been hit 3 times, and he believes the culprits are unregistered, uncontrolled pets allowed to roam, not wild dogs.
Well, it's traumatising on the stock and the owners because the stock can't defend themselves against that sort of dog. And it's at night, it's not in daylight.
It's a pretty brutal end result, isn't it, John?
Yeah, well, 3 neighbours here who lost stock, yes.
Can you tell me what happened at your place?
Well, we've had 3 attacks and different coloured dogs. And it's the same with the neighbours. And, of course, the council officers have difficulty tracing 3 different coloured dogs. The dogs that we did shoot weren't microchipped.
So, John, can you tell me how many stock you lost?
We had 16 adult sheep. We're down to 6. We had 22 lambs. We lost half of those. And then they killed I bought some calves. We reared a few calves. They killed a calf, and the one on the photo is on 3 legs, and the other one recovered. And they cleaned out our chooks. 8 hens, I think it was.
I mean, you must be worried when you go to bed at night if it's always happening in the dark.
That's right. I mean, with the wet weather we had, we're on slippery clay, falling over in the dark, wandering around, waiting for a dog is not on.
So these dogs, you say various colours, different dogs on different occasions. Do you think they're wild or are they someone's unregistered pets, do you reckon, John?
Well, I would say unregistered pets because years ago we had lambs and my daughter heard this lamb getting crunched up and I went out, all I could see was the eyes and I fired a shot. And what had happened was it was a neighbour's Labrador dog. Nice, friendly fellow in the day, but at night a killer. So you don't know what breeds on the go, but most of them are pig dog types.
And 3 of your neighbours have had attacks as well, is that right?
Yeah, one had 7 sheep wiped out, the other chap had 3 and his poultry cleaned up. Yeah.
How many of these dogs have you guys managed to shoot?
Well, we shot one, and of course the one that ran away was feeding pups, and my neighbour, who works down the road, saw where the dogs came from. So anyway, the dog ranger went there, and they claimed the dog we shot was the mother dog, but I'm not going to get into an argument, you know, whether the dog's feeding pups or not because of its udder.
How responsive has the council been? How helpful, John?
Well, they come and set some traps here and a trap across the road. They caught a cat, but those dogs don't go into traps. They just go out to kill.
What needs to happen then?
It's difficult for all parties because the only way is to catch them in the act, and if you can't catch them at night, what do? Otherwise, it just goes round in circles, and if the dog people from council had more powers, well, what's the use of more powers unless they can identify the dog that did the damage?
So does someone need to park themselves out there on your property, John, from the council and catch these dogs?
Well, you can't expect people to sit up all night waiting for dogs. It's a bit of a losing battle, really, yeah. But it's just the trauma of it all, and of course we've had the vet out here twice because with sheep, if they have bite marks, they don't heal as good, and then the blowflies start attacking, and not nice. Anyway, there'll be $1,000 damage, but what we've done now, we've insured what we've got left.
$1,000 for vet bills, that's expensive, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Well, he was here for 2 or 3 hours catching these what's left because they're limping, and some of these ewes he euthanised because the damage is too great. Yeah.
So where does this leave you then?
Well, it just leaves you with half the numbers, and my neighbours is out sheep, and they're not going to buy any more because of the likelihood of being attacked again.
And no solution, John?
No solution. Yeah. Other farmers which have suffered further down the valley here, children's lost sheep, so the neighbours all got together and they finally got the dogs, and they were just pig dogs, unregistered and just gone wild.
How much of a problem are uncontrolled dogs, John, in your area?
Comes in patches. I could name another farmer that had to lock his sheep up in the wool shed. And finally he went out and went into pine trees because of the dogs. Yeah.
And that is John Coleman. It is 12 minutes to 6. Kia mau tunu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. A former manager of multiple Gloria Vale companies has told the Employment Court the religious community generates most of its income through government benefits. A hearing has resumed today in Christchurch as 6 former Gloria Vale women seeking a ruling they were employees, not volunteers, during their time there. Neva Chittick reports.
Ex-Gloria Vale leader Zion Pilgrim told the court from age 6, children were expected to work.
The reality for all of the children in the 3 age categories, 6 to 12 years, 13 years and 14 to 18 years, is that they are required to work long, punishing hours.
Mr Pilgrim says his own children went into full-time work at 14.
Boys are expected to work in heavy and dangerous industry, and the girls, now called single girls, shoulder the burden of running the teams, which ensures that the men were able to continue to work in their jobs, being provided the hostel accommodation, food, clothing, washing, and anything that was required.
Despite the work done by members of the community, he says the most money is generated by claiming government benefits.
The largest income earner for the community is the children through the early childcare centres, school, and the money received from working for families. This amount comes to approximately 4 to 4.5 million and is the largest income stream for the community from the New Zealand taxpayer.
In 2020, Zion Pilgrim and his wife, Gloriana, became concerned with how recent sexual misconduct in childcare centres was handled.
My wife asked about what the safety policy was for the centres with regards to young men coming in the centre during hours, and the response to her was, "You are not a woman of faith." And so anyone that questions anything like that, well, do you not trust us?
Mr Pilgrim was a Gloria Vale servant and wrote a letter to the wider leadership asking for change. He told the court he had a strong feeling that police should be involved when dealing with criminal offending. Shortly afterwards, leader Howard Temple told Mr Pilgrim the only way he would be allowed to stay in the community is if he rejected the letter and agreed to drop his leadership role. Zion Pilgrim says he had never intended to leave the community when he wrote the letter, but believed he had no choice. He says questioning the word of the leaders was frowned upon, especially if it was a woman who doubted their word.
It's a way of life, and they're all essentially enslaved to that way of life. Any question about any part of it, especially if you're a woman, is totally unacceptable. And that is the scripture that gets used to keep the woman in their place, which is subservient and silent.
Gloria Vale's leaders strongly deny the claims and maintain the women were never employees of the community.
It is 8 minutes to 6. New Zealanders are gathering all over the country to watch Queen Elizabeth's funeral later this evening. The ceremony, expected to be attended by 2,000 guests, will begin at 10 o'clock New Zealand time. Our reporter Haisa Almeida hit the streets to ask Kiwis whether they'll stay up for the once-in-a-lifetime event.
The last mourners have paid their final respects to Queen Elizabeth II, and she will soon begin the journey from Westminster Hall to Westminster Abbey for her funeral service. Outside, 1 million people are expected to gather over the coming hours around the royal palaces to catch a glimpse of the procession or watch the service on big television screens. But back here, New Zealanders will need to stay up late. In Auckland's inner suburb of Parnell, Corina says the event should be unforgettable.
I don't know how long I can last, but I'm definitely going to watch as much as I can.
She says her memories of Queen Elizabeth are still fresh.
A long time ago, when I first started in New Zealand, I saw her very close up coming up Queen Street. It was in the 70s.
Shop owner Craig says although he did not know much about the Queen, one thing is certain.
It's nice to be important, but it's more important to be nice. And for some reason, she done that.
In the central Auckland suburb of Newmarket, this resident says the event will be a mark on history and shouldn't be missed.
I'll watch it until I can't stay awake anymore. She's been an extraordinary woman, and it is a ritual and ceremony that we won't see again in my lifetime.
This woman says for those who cannot stay up too late, missing out on the ceremony is not an option.
I think we might catch up on the highlights tomorrow. Having lived in London for 18 years, she was always there in the background, and we did watch her Christmas messages. My husband played football with Prince William a couple of times.
The Waiku and District's Combined Churches is an Auckland-based community that would be holding a gathering for people to watch the Queen's funeral later tonight. Its minister, Reverend Richard Gray, says the idea is to share memories and thoughts of the sovereign and together pay respects.
Have a sort of supper, bring a plate, have a supper together. TV will be going on the screen at that point, and we'll just gather for the service when the formalities start. Sort of thought that maybe a lot of the public too that might like to come down and experience the funeral together.
The Queen's funeral service will finish around 11 p.m. New Zealand time. Her coffin will then begin its final journey to Windsor Castle.
And that report from Haisa Almeida. Let's get to some of your feedback about whether you're going to be watching that funeral or not. Debbie from Tasman says, I'll be watching the broadcast of the Queen's funeral live as long as I can keep awake. I'm UK born and have been unable to get back to the UK since the very first lockdown in 2020 because of illnesses and lockdowns. My dad was of the same generation as the Queen. He died during the lockdown in 2020. I couldn't get to the UK, so I am acknowledging that the death of the Queen signifies the end of that generation. Thanks for getting in touch, Debbie. Someone else says the government should give us a holiday so we can all stay up and watch the funeral like Tuesday, not a week later. I have to say, it's been a subject of much discussion among many people. Chair says, unfortunately, the transmission clashes with Perry Mason. Elizabeth says, I will be staying up and watching the whole ceremony. Despite being Mexican living in New Zealand, we are very interested in the royals in that part of the world. And this one, before we move on, I've lived in New Zealand for more than 30 30 years, have New Zealand citizenship, married to a Kiwi, my children all born here. I am immersed in the Kiwi way of life up until the Queen died. I really thought I'd left my birth country well and truly behind me, but these last 10 days I have felt myself longing to be back in the home country. I guess you can take the girl out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the girl. I am proud to be a Kiwi, but I am also proud to be British. Thanks for your feedback, 2101 on the text. Lift off at long last. Air New Zealand has finally opened its long-awaited Auckland to New York route about 3 years after it was announced. The return journeys hit some turbulence with some passengers' bags left behind to meet the fuel requirements. But in the Big Apple, some big names have headlined a glitzy rooftop gig. Our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch, was at the party.
Don't forget your roots, my friend, yeah.
A prime ministerial party without a prime minister. There was no expense spared at Air New Zealand's New York festivities, perched on the highest outdoor sky deck in the Western Hemisphere. Kiwi phenomenon 660 putting on a rooftop show to celebrate the airline's new direct flight from Auckland.
Don't forget your roots, my friend. Don't forget your family, yeah.
It was a who's list of attendees, including actress Keisha Castle-Hughes and former PM Helen Clark. But the number one guest, Jacinda Ardern, had to cancel to attend rather more important commitments in London. The Tourism Minister Stuart Nash taking her place.
And our Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern would have been here tonight, but in a couple of hours' time she is actually going to be attending the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II.
The New York Mayor, Eric Adams, was also set to attend, but sent his apologies, leaving it to one of his deputy commissioners, Kristen Kaufman, to speak in his place.
And I'd love to give a special thanks to Air New Zealand's CEO. Let me pronounce it correctly. Greg. Yes, Greg Ferns.
Greg Foran, the airline's chief, welcomed guests to the party, some 3 years after the lengthy route was first announced.
Events got in the way, didn't they? But we're not hanging about now. Here we are, no stopovers, no plane changes, just one sleep, and we wake up in a city that never sleeps.
The flight's launch marks a shift back to normality for Air New Zealand, as it, along with the country, seeks to leave the pandemic behind.
New Zealand has never been closer. Woo! We are here. And the other thing is that we are also open for business. Thank goodness. No masks.
The upbeat atmosphere jarred somewhat with the royal funeral preparations underway, but the airline was determined to push ahead regardless.
Things like getting your time slots in place in JFK, so we really needed to get ahead and do that, and I know the Prime Minister is disappointed that she couldn't make this flight, but she has duties elsewhere and we obviously fully understand that. In the meantime, let's get this underway.
The Prime Minister is expected to arrive in New York tomorrow afternoon to attend the United Nations General Assembly. World leaders have a pressing list of priorities, not least Russia's war in Ukraine, climate change and global economic instability. Jacinda Ardern may have missed the party, but there's plenty of business still to attend to.
And that report was from Craig McCulloch. Now, Mark has got in touch about Air New Zealand and says we love Air New Zealand, but maybe if we're having to choose between luggage or fuel, we're not flying the right equipment for this long haul from NYC. Yeah, it's an interesting predicament. Fewer passengers on the way back and having to leave behind luggage. On the subject of Sam Uffindell, the National MP, Jeanette says, yep, good timing for Luxon and Uffindell. They can quietly get on with it all without the focus of most of New Zealand, it being on the Queen's funeral. What an absolute joke, another listener says, that Uffindell has been welcomed back into the arms of the National Party. And this person says, I'm glad Sam Uffindell is getting a second chance. Mr Luxon has reminded us of the need for forgiveness. None of us is perfect. Let's move on now, says Claire. Someone else says, come on, Lisa, National buries this on the same day as the Queen's funeral.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Sarah Bradley. The National Party leader says the findings of an independent report are enough to reinstate Tauranga MP Sam Uffindell to caucus. An inquiry was launched about 6 weeks ago after accusations he acted in a threatening and abusive manner to a former flatmate while at Otago University. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Sam Uffindell admits to being a bully at secondary school, but flatly denies the allegations from his university days, nearly 20 years ago. Maria Jew KC found the incident did not happen as described by the complainant in the media and found no evidence of other bullying behaviour by the MP. The actual report remains secret, however, with leader Christopher Luxon discussing only the general findings. Labour has criticised the timing of the release, calling it disrespectful and cynical to do it on the day of the Queen's funeral.
Around 2,000 people will attend the state funeral for the Queen, which gets underway at 10 o'clock tonight, New Zealand time. The service at Westminster Abbey in London will last for 1 hour and will be brought to an end by the Queen's Piper. The BBC's Johnny Diamond has more details.
For 2 minutes today, the drumming will cease, the pipes will fall silent, the march of boots on procession routes will still, and Westminster, the capital and the country, will fall silent as the state funeral, the first of 2 services, comes to a close. But first, with ceremony unseen for more than 7 decades, the coffin of the Queen will be taken by gun carriage into Westminster Abbey. There, a congregation of kings and queens, prime ministers and presidents, a head-turning array of the great and the good, will rise for the procession of the Queen into the Abbey, where she was married, where she was crowned.
A former Gloria Vale leader says government benefits provided most of the Christian community's funding. Zion Pilgrim was the director of many of the community's companies. He told the Employment Court hearing in Christchurch that taxpayer-funded benefits provided millions of dollars for the community.
The largest income earner for the community is the children through the early childcare centres, school and the money received from working for families. This amount comes to approximately 4 to 4.5 million.
Zion Pilgrim says children were also expected to work from the age of 6 in what he describes as punishing conditions. Police in Dunedin are not ruling out more arrests as 2 men appear in court charged with conspiring to import cocaine. The foreign nationals were arrested over the weekend, accused of trying to take drugs off a ship docked at Port Chalmers. They have been remanded in custody after appearing in the Dunedin District Court today. The arrests come as the police investigate an international crime syndicate's involvement in importing Class A drugs into New Zealand. It led to 91 kilograms of cocaine being seized in the US last month. The governor of Puerto Rico has welcomed the US government's declaration of emergency after Hurricane Fiona threw the island into darkness. The Category 1 hurricane is threatening to dump historic levels of rain, expected to produce landslides and catastrophic flooding. The people of Puerto Rico are still recovering from the disastrous Hurricane Maria in 2017, which caused nearly 3,000 deaths. Thousands of homes in Japan's southern Kyushu island are without power as Typhoon Nanmadol continues to cause destruction. The huge storm, which made landfall last week, has unleashed torrential rain and high winds, forcing tens of thousands of people to spend the night in emergency shelters. The Health and Disability Commissioner has found that a retirement provider breached code by failing to care for a resident who had a fall. A woman in her 80s was found slumped in her chair at Selwyn Village in Auckland after previously refusing to see a nurse. Felix Walton reports.
When the woman was visited by a staff member, she couldn't remember what caused her fall. The staff member left her but later returned and found her in pain and unable to move. An ambulance was called. Deputy Commissioner Rose Wall says the Selwyn Foundation had a responsibility to care for the woman and should have had clear guidelines for staff. She says the retirement sector is inconsistent in how it cares for residents. Ms. Wall recommends that Selwyn Village and other retirement providers treat the incident as a warning.
A petition to reclassify chronic fatigue syndrome as a disability is expected to be presented to Parliament tomorrow. 25,000 New Zealanders are thought to suffer from the debilitating disease. A medical lecturer at Auckland University, Dr. Tanisha Jalzi, hopes the petition will provide sufferers with better access to disability support services. A far north farmer whose livestock has been savaged by dogs believes the culprits are unregistered pets. John Coleman's farm has been hit 3 times by dogs, leaving him with dead animals and large vet bills. He says the result has been devastating.
We had 16 adult sheep, we're down to 6. We had 22 lambs, we lost half of those, and then they killed a calf and they cleaned out our chooks.
John Coleman says 3 of his neighbours have also had livestock attacked. And a Palestinian farmer has uncovered an ornate Byzantine mosaic floor on his land in the Gaza Strip. Salman al-Nabahin says he and his son were trying to dig a hole to plant an olive tree when they discovered the relic. They later covered several more sections depicting colourful animals and birds. Experts say it's one of the greatest archaeological treasures ever found in Gaza. The Byzantine Empire was the eastern half of the Roman Empire, which can be traced back to 330 AD and survived for more than 1,000 years. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Dr. Mary Livingston, 40 years a marine scientist. Mona Lynn Courteau has a quartet of delightful songs from Latin America. Then we'll have a musical soundtrack to the life of Queen Elizabeth II, the music she enjoyed, the music written for her, before we cross to London for live coverage of her funeral. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air, Te Reo Irirangi o Aotearoa. Lisa Owen and Checkpoint back in a moment. But first, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland and Bay of Plenty, periods of rain with heavy falls. Auckland to Taranaki, including Coromandel, the Central High Country. Rain with heavy falls possible, easing to isolated showers tomorrow morning. Rain developing from the north from late tomorrow afternoon. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Whanganui to Wellington. Scattered rain clearing tomorrow morning, but returning to Gisborne tomorrow evening. Marlborough and Nelson, scattered showers clearing this afternoon, then mainly fine. A few showers in Nelson and the Sounds tomorrow afternoon. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, showers turning to rain tomorrow morning. Heavy falls, hail and thunderstorms possible in Fiordland and Westland. Gradually easing from the south tomorrow morning. For Canterbury, mainly fine, isolated showers developing tomorrow afternoon. Otago and Southland, scattered showers, thunderstorms possible in Southland, Clutha and Dunedin tomorrow afternoon. And for the Chatham Islands, mainly fine, rain developing around midday tomorrow. You're listening to RNZ National. It's coming up to 8 minutes past 6. I'll have the news headlines at past.
No mihi e ho, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. London's gearing up for the Queen's funeral, which is set to be the most watched televised event in history. About 2 million people are expected to line the streets of the capital. Some have been there for days, camped out, waiting for the chance to catch a glimpse of the Queen's procession passing by. World leaders have descended on London, and an estimated 4 billion people are expected to watch the funeral on TV. Corin Dan is in London and he joins us now. Kia ora anō, Corin, tell us about what kind of preparation has been going on there.
Well, where do you begin, really? Because I think the really important thing to remember here is that the plan for this funeral is decades in the making, which is just staggering to think about. There has been the plan, the London Bridge Plan, as it is known, has been in place for many, many years. It gets updated constantly and has been. And so everything here has a playbook. There is a rule book for how it all works, and you can sense that and feel that everything is going to plan, including the queue, which one person, I understand, was spent many years organising just alone. Now, right now, where I am, it is starting to really get busier. We just had maybe a couple of thousand armed forces, soldiers and Navy personnel walking past us here over the bridge. They'll be heading in to be part of the procession, because the funeral procession today will involve a massive amount of armed forces, of course, including some New Zealanders. There will be a Commonwealth element to that, so I think that's going to be quite spectacular, just the sheer numbers who will be marching there. I can see cycle paramedics heading around. That's been a feature here. They just can't get around with ambulances, so they have to have them on cycles, which I know a lot of cycling enthusiasts will be pretty excited about to see. So things are just starting to ramp up. The tricky part is going to be, getting across that bridge and into the middle of London, because the numbers of people there are just so tight. The footpaths, the barriers are all in place. All the footpaths all the way through town have barriers on them to stop people going on the road. So it's real squish trying to move anywhere.
Corin, I can hear a bit of clattering and clanging in the background. Are people moving in barriers or something, or is it just randoms going past?
Yeah, no, there is definitely a bit more activity here. The final preparations, because we're very close to Westminster Abbey where this is all happening. In fact, I think the world leaders will be going in pretty early, probably 2 hours early, and the guests into Westminster Abbey. So we're not far off where they're going to be getting pretty angsty. This is the biggest security operation this country has ever undertaken, because along with having to have all the organisation of all the millions of people and the crowd control and the police, you've just got this enormous security operation to make sure that the 500 world leaders and dignitaries all in one place at one time are going to remain safe and secure. So you can imagine that there are snipers all around here on roofs. There are huge control rooms with cameras, everything. Drones are going to be used as well to surveil areas. Nothing will be left to chance here, because the risks are high. So it is going to be a very, very tight operation, and I think any leeway of trying to get through barriers and wanting to have a little look here or look there, there's no chance of that. There's absolutely firm no's if you try and sneak your way in anywhere.
Yeah, I see a lot of fluorescent vests behind your right shoulder as well. Are those just people helping with people control and kind of ushering folk in the right direction?
Yeah, there's an army of high vests. I was just saying to my cameraman before, because we're thinking, you put on a high vest, you'd get anywhere in this city at the moment. They're everywhere. There is just so many people hired. It's amazing how they would have gone about that, hiring everybody, all the security guards, all the police, all the personnel, just to keep this thing ticking along. And it has been going on for so long. That's the other thing too, because the minute we got here, last Sunday was it? I've almost forgotten. It was visible right away. Look, they're used to doing jubilees and big things, but this is another level up. And they want to make sure that this is a fantastic send-off, and I'm sure it will be. And watching the funeral today and the way in which it will be laid out, looking at where people are seated. I mean, some of the media here are already obsessing about where Harry's going to be, where he's going to be sitting. Will he be one row back? Will he be at the front row, or will he be with the cousins?
Where are you going to be sitting, Corin? To watch,
well, hopefully
in all seriousness.
On the grass at Hyde Park. No, hopefully on the grass at Hyde Park. Look, in an ideal world, it would be nice to maybe be on the Mall to watch the procession, but there are thousands of people in tents there. They've been there for days. You can't fight your way through those people. So, look, we will go with to Hyde Park, which will be great because there'll be thousands of people there watching that on a big screen. And I really do think, despite all the noise and all the activity and all this talk, I just think for that hour, I think it's just that's when things will really just come to a halt, and people can take that time to just breathe and calm and reflect and take in their experiences with the Queen, their thoughts, whether they're a monarch or not, share the experience. And I think, as you say, with 4 billion people watching, that in itself is something to think about just for a moment in time.
Best of luck, Corin. Good to talk to you. That's Corin Dan joining us live from London with Big Ben in the background there. And after the silence, 2-minute silence at the Abbey, Big Ben will toll continuously as the Queen's procession leaves the Abbey and continues on its journey. It is 14 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Among the well-known names and faces at the Queen's funeral, an unusual guest in a cowboy hat. Monty Roberts is famous for training horses without violence, a method that impressed Queen Elizabeth and formed the basis of a friendship that lasted decades. The BBC's Regan Morris talked to Monty at his ranch in Salvange, California, before he set off for London.
A cowboy from California gets a knighthood. Can you believe it?
Monty Roberts is known as a real-life horse whisperer. When the Queen heard about his non-violent horse training, she invited him to Windsor to see his methods for herself.
But they got to know who's boss. I heard that so many times. The horse has to know who's boss. They don't have to know who's boss.
The Queen was clearly impressed because that 1989 visit was the first of many. Inside his Solvang, California ranch, Monty has documented their friendship with many framed photographs, letters, and Christmas cards.
The thing I guess I'm most proud of is in her office receiving the MVO knighthood. And there's no cameras allowed in there, but Her Majesty did her thing and got a camera in there and took the picture and sent it to me. That's just the way she treated me through our entire relationship. Quite an unusual relationship we had where we were just the closest of friends, with the horses being our intermediaries. Try not to have your voices any more than you have to.
When we arrived at Monty's ranch, a family of deer responded to his whistle by racing to eat from his hand. He said the Queen believed in his philosophy that animals perform better if you build up their spirit instead of breaking it down.
Was completely sold on the fact that horses do not need violence in their life to become broken. That's ridiculous.
And apparently she'd take your call at any time. I heard she was meeting with Mikhail Gorbachev and...
Yeah, isn't it amazing that all those years, and she took every single call. But one time I called, and they said, oh yes, Monty, but Her Majesty's in a meeting in Northern Ireland with the politicians there, and she won't be able to take your call. And I said, oh, well, that's okay. Just tell me when I should call back then. And then I heard, Monty, how are you? Your Majesty.
And that was cowboy and horse whisperer Monty Roberts. What a delight. From London, the Queen's funeral procession will move to Windsor. Now, our reporter Katie Todd is there and she joins us now live. Katie, how are things looking there?
Kia ora. Well, dawn is breaking here and we're now just seeing thousands and thousands of people lining the 5-kilometre long walk which leads up to Windsor Castle. There's people as far as the eye can see. And it's quite a different atmosphere to some of the more frenzied scenes that we've seen in town over the past few days. People are settling in for the long haul here. We've got 8 hours till the main event. Feels like every camping chair in England is here lining the fences. People have got their flasks of coffee and they are just waiting, watching the screens. The funeral will play on the big screens here, and then there will be the wait until the coffin arrives and makes its way up to St George's Chapel.
So are they all pretty well prepared with provisions for the long wait?
Yes, well, we caught the train out here this morning, and it seems like everyone on the train had a camping chair, a flask of coffee, a blanket, a puffer jacket, umbrella. Everyone has kind of thought about what they're going to bring and how they're going to make the most of it here.
And what is expected there?
Well, as I mentioned, the large screens will show the funeral, and then at 3 o'clock, the Queen's coffin will pass just metres from where these people are waiting. We're expecting crowds of up to 150,000 or more here. And all the events, the Queen's procession up the long walk, that has been meticulously rehearsed by the military in the days leading up to this. And the police presence here is obviously very significant. We've seen police walking past carrying submachine guns. There are officials everywhere guiding you where to go. There's a security checkpoint, and it is a full operation.
Thanks for that, Katie. Katie Todd joining us from Windsor there. She's talking about the long walk where people are getting prepared to watch the Queen's funeral procession. I suppose the last time people gathered there would be when the Sussexes got married in any great crowd. There is another wet summer ahead on Australia's east coast, and the rain that comes will fall on soaked catchments. As emergency services prepare for more serious flooding, the government is changing the way it handles natural disasters. The ABC's Tom Lowry reports.
It's going to be another La Niña summer, and with that comes the warning of floods along the east coast. But in parts of Western New South Wales, the floods are already here. Matthew Dickerson is the mayor of Dubbo.
Farmers have got water that's just flowing across the top because the actual land itself has got so much water in the ground already. So any rain that falls doesn't seem to be absorbed by the ground at the moment because it's already fully saturated. So any rain that falls seems to turn straight into runoff.
There have been evacuation orders, isolation warnings and major road closures across the region. And more rain is forecast this week and in the months ahead.
I've never seen so many dams that have got water in them, never seen so much water just lying around on the roads in areas where it's just quite incredible just to see so much water around, and you're just not seeing that water go. It's not getting away. It can't get away anywhere.
This will be the third La Niña summer in a row, and emergency authorities at all levels of government are preparing for a wet and difficult season, particularly in the nation's east. Murray Watt is the Federal Minister for Emergency Management.
I think that it will be a difficult time, and that's why I think that we need to make sure as a federal government that we are fully prepared, that we have our functions working properly.
In the months since taking office, the government has made some significant changes to how it handles natural disasters. Two agencies, the National Recovery and Resilience Agency and Emergency Management Australia, have been merged to form the new National Emergency Management Agency. It'll be led by Brendan Moon, who currently runs the Queensland Reconstruction Authority. It may sound like a bureaucratic shift, but Senator Watt says it'll make a difference.
By combining the disaster response and disaster recovery capacity of the federal government, it leads to a much more coordinated effort.
Former New South Wales Fire Chief Greg Mullins, who now works with emergency leaders for climate action, agrees. He was consulted on the changes and says there was a genuine dysfunction that needed to be addressed. He says the broader change that's now required is a shift in focus from responding to disasters to preparing for them.
Some years ago, the Productivity Commission found that 97% of disaster spending happens after the event in response and recovery, and only 3% is spent preparing for disasters. So we really need to change that mix.
Greg Mullins says there are pleasing signs that change is underway, but with the certainty of disasters to come, there's plenty of resilience work to do.
We need to prepare communities, so buy up homes that are on floodplains and move them out of harm's way. Train up communities, give them information about risks so that they can make decisions about what they'll do in a disaster, and that's the resilience piece.
And staying in Oz, it's been 21 years since Australia's first supervised injecting room was opened in Sydney. And advocates say it has saved hundreds of lives and also directed many drug users into treatment. The centre has faced controversy ever since its inception, with opponents warning that it would become a honeypot for drug users. But advocates say it stopped people from overdosing on the streets. The ABC's Angus Randall reports.
In 2001, debate raged over Australia's first ever supervised injecting room, which was being set up in one of the world's drug hotspots.
I was working in King's Cross at the time and it felt like ground zero, to be honest.
Dr Marianne Jauncey is the medical director of the Uniting Sydney Medically Supervised Injecting Centre.
Heroin was pretty much readily available in and around the streets of King's Cross. Use was at an all-time high and tragically death was at an all-time high. And back in 1999, which was the year of the drug summit in New South Wales, we had more people dying from accidental opiate overdose than we had dying in car crashes and on the roads in the country. So King's Cross was kind of literally X marks the spot. We had the highest concentration of heroin overdose deaths of anywhere in the world.
21 years ago, the situation was dire, but not everyone thought a place where drug users could inject under supervision was the answer.
So I think there was a range of views from, the extremes of, this is terrible and everything you're doing is wrong, all the way through to people saying, about time and we need these, in every suburb.
The King's Cross Centre says it's had nearly 11,000 overdoses on site since it opened, with no deaths. That's close to 3 interventions per day. Dr Marianne Jauncey says there are still myths about the centre which won't go away.
So I think sometimes people think that we're facilitating drug use and keeping somebody in the path of addiction. Now, there's very good evidence from peer-reviewed literature here and overseas that, in fact, coming to a supervised injection facility means you're more likely to receive referrals into care and support and more likely to make it into those referral areas and get on treatment.
The concept has failed to catch on in the 21 years since. Only one other supervised injecting room has been set up in Australia, in North Richmond in Melbourne.
So there certainly has been an increase around the rest of the world. So we are definitely lagging behind. If you look at numbers of supervised injecting facilities around the world, they have continued to go up. In Canada, they've rapidly expanded and have, got 60, 70, 80 supervised injecting facilities across the country.
There are thousands of places across the nation where drug users can access clean needles, but they're then sent away to inject off-site. Dr. Marianne Jauncey says governments are putting their heads in the sand.
What happens when we provide that clean injecting equipment? People go and use it somewhere, don't they? And I think we forget. We sort of close our eyes as if our duty of care extends only to the provision of clean injecting equipment. Being alone is an independent risk factor for dying. People don't need to die. Intervening in a heroin overdose is actually quite simple. You can save a life just by being present.
And that was Dr. Marianne Jauncey from Sydney's Supervised Injecting Facility ending that report. Turning 60 usually means retirement is on the horizon. Time to start taking things a little slower. Yeah, who says that? Certainly not Frenchman Alain Robert, using just his bare hands and a bag of chalk powder. He celebrated the big 6-0 by scaling a 187-metre tower in Paris. The BBC's Eleanor Sly reports.
The sky was cloudless blue as the autumn sun illuminated a tiny red speck creeping slowly up the side of one of the towers in the La Défense business district of Paris. The man, clad entirely in red and black, was Alain Robert. He was celebrating his 60th birthday. Crowds gathered at the foot of the Total Energies tower to watch the man, dubbed the French Spider-Man, attempt to reach the top. Mr. Robert has been free climbing for nearly half a century. He does not use ropes or a harness, just climbing shoes and chalk, and has scaled more than 150 buildings. These include the Sydney Opera House and the world's tallest structure, Dubai's Burj Khalifa. The aim of his latest climb was to raise awareness about climate change. He also wanted to show people that turning 60 is, as he put it, nothing.
People around me, they are taking care about their food, about everything, and they are dying. Some they are having cancer, some they became Alzheimer's, some they got a stroke, so some they got a heart attack. So meaning that either you are waiting, you are taking any precaution to stay alive for as long as you can, or you are just living your dreams. And although it may be the last one, but at least you are doing something that you love doing.
Having reached the top of the tower, Mr. Robert was met with whistles and cheers from the crowds below, but he was quickly arrested by the police. He had not asked for permission to climb the tower.
And it gave me the absolute heebies watching me do it, the real-life Spidey. The organisers of a music festival in Uganda say an attempt by Parliament to ban the gathering over concern it would promote immoral behaviour has actually boosted ticket sales. Musicians have headed to Uganda from all over the African continent to get people dancing. The event near the banks of the River Nile has attracted about 12,000 people, many of them from overseas, eager to enjoy themselves after 2 years of lockdowns. The BBC's Will Ross reports.
4 days of fun close to the banks of the River Nile. That's what this Nyege Nyege festival is all about. Just a few days ago, Uganda's parliament voted to ban the event. MPs said it would promote immorality. But it seems the last-minute effort to stop the fun helped promote the event, as the organisers said ticket sales increased. It's unlikely that without the MPs' help, Nyege Nyege would have got a mention in the Irish Times, for example. Some festival goers said they hadn't heard of the festival until it popped up on a news feed on their mobile phones. Quite a few commentators in Uganda said the country's lawmakers were perhaps not exactly best placed to discuss the topic of morality. The Monitor newspaper pointed out that it might all be too much for the purists, whether it's the dress code, the type of music, or the sexual orientation of the people turning up. But it concluded that it's certainly not a matter to be discussed and summarily banned by the legislature. No doubt newspapers on Monday will carry photos of the Deputy Prime Minister, Rebecca Kadaga, who turned up and had a dance. Just like at other festivals across the world, there are of course a few who are not happy with the sleeping arrangements or the state of the showers. And no doubt there will also be one or two complaining about the quality of the hangovers.
Now, that's pretty much all we've got time for this evening. The Late News team's going to keep you updated throughout the night. And don't forget, RNZ's coverage of Queen Elizabeth II's funeral will begin at 9 p.m. this evening. If you missed anything from the program, you can find Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcasts from. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō tomorrow from 5 a.m. First up, we'll be live in London and Windsor as Queen Elizabeth II is laid to rest. Do tune in. They will have all the updates and highlights. Kaua e wareware te atatero e a mātou kōrero. Check out our stories and videos online.
Kia ora, here are the headlines. A 2-minute silence will be held in the UK tonight during the Queen's state funeral. The service starts at 10 o'clock New Zealand time. A former Gloria Vale leader has told the Employment Court that social welfare benefits provided millions of dollars for the community. National MP Sam Uffindell says he's looking forward to getting back to work after a report found that allegations against him were unproven. And Japan has issued a special warning as Typhoon Nanmadol causes millions of people to take refuge. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Insect/bug sex. Is that the little piece where she's talking about